Talking about me, I am a 12x certified Salesforce architect and I have more than 6 years of industry experience. In this demo, we are going to cover the basics of LWC component, and I am assuming that we have already covered how an org can be authorized to create the LWC component. In this demo, we are going to proceed further and create a LWC component using the HTML templates, understanding the bundle, what is conditional rendering, and how you can use loops for iteration. We will keep this small and we will try to cover all these topics. And if you talk about the course outline, we have all these courses. In this course, we are providing these topics in depth. For example, LWC fundamentals, JavaScript properties, which is a very integral part of LWC. And then one major part is how to communicate with events between more than two LWC components. And then if you need to access Salesforce data, how do you do that? And all the inside out of the LWC components is going to be covered in this course. We are going to cover 3 projects, not in this demo, but with the complete course. So we will get the data from the backend using Apex and show it on the front end. Then we will create a search component, which is going to filter out the data that was just returned in project 1. And in project 3, we are going to combine these 2 projects so that these 2 components can actually communicate via events. And that builds up a complex enough LWC component to serve as a project. So to start with the LWC component, you would need a high-speed internet with a desktop and laptop, and you must have a minimum 8 GB of RAM, probably DDR4 and i3 or above processor for a seamless experience. I will also provide you with additional documentations from Salesforce and additional links so that you can learn more. After the demo, we will cover mock interviews, mock interview questions, and what you can expect. I am inside my Salesforce org. This is my Salesforce org, and I'm just going to create my first LWC component. So from our previous classes, we know that this is the VS Code integrated development environment that we need to use to create any LWC component, a Lightning Web component. LWC is basically a successor of Aura components, and it has better security standards, it is more fast, and it improves the overall user experience at the front end. So to create the LWC component, once you have authorized your org with the IDE, Integrated Development Environment, it is going to bind your org, and you will see a cloud icon here, which means that your org is now connected to your Salesforce. Your IDE is now connected to the Salesforce org. To create a new LWC component, I will press Command Shift and P, or if you're on Windows, you'll press Control Shift P, and you'll select this option, create a Lightning Web component. Say my test component, I name it. You can give whatever name you like, press Enter. And this is the basic component structure that you will get at the starting when you start creating a LWC component. Without this, you cannot actually you cannot remove this particular import statement, because this gives a JavaScript class to the component, which gives it the LWC structure. Talking about the bundle, LWC component, if you see on the left hand side here, my test component, this bundle has a HTML file, a JS file, and a meta XML file. You can also add a CSS file to give styling to it. These 3 files will work together as a bundle to support one LWC component, and that will happen for each LWC component. So the HTML file is basically simple HTML tags with Salesforce framework. The JavaScript basically holds your client-side code to do the client-side functioning and calculations. Probably even if you need to hit the Apex class, you will need to do that in the JavaScript code. And then there is meta XML file for the configurations. So if I simply say I need lightning card with the title component, close it. I add a division element to say that this is my first component. This basically is the HTML tags that you can use for the very starting of your LWC component. Lightning card basically displays it in a card with the title of the card that you can use, and you can say this is my first component in the division tag. As of now, to display this component, you do not need any JavaScript code because this is just the component. And then once you push this code, this is in your local system, this is in your IDE, this is not in your org right now. And you add this component anywhere on your page, it will be visible whatever you write on the component. But the thing is that to make it visible, you have to expose this. So if you go here, is exposed is mentioned as false. So for example, this is my test component, and if I deploy this source to org, and close the other components, deployed. Now let's say I go to any account record, I go to edit page, and I want this component, this my test component, to be added anywhere on the page. So if I say my test component, this is not visible right now. The reason that it is not visible is because in the XML file, it is not exposed. So we need to mark this as true. Now this will be exposed. We'll need to deploy it again, and we need to tell the target where this particular thing is going to be exposed. And you can have multiple targets inside the target tag. For example, my target could be Lightning app page. That means on the Lightning apps I can use it. Same way I can use it on the report page or home page. I'm going to write report page, and I'm going to write this is exposed on these targets. Right, this is my XML. I saved it. Now I right click on this particular file. I click on deploy. What will happen is this will take my code from my local source to my org. I go to my org, I refresh this page, and I say my test component. You see now this is visible, right? I push this, let's say here, on top of activities. So now this is where I am putting my test component. I click on save, and I go back, and you see my test component was the title, and this is my first component is visible here, which was in our LWC code. This is my first component with the title my test component. You can even add an icon at this place. Let's say I add an icon, custom, and then custom theme. These are the icons that are provided by Salesforce out of the box, and these can be used to give more customization or more look and feel of the Salesforce arc. Now you see we have an icon here, right? With CSS, we can control how this looks, but by default, it actually takes up similarities to the feel and look of the Salesforce Lightning arc, right? This is how you create a first LWC component or your Hello World component. Now, let's say we talk about conditional rendering, as we know that it was the scope in the scope of our demo. What conditional rendering means is that you want to conditionally show or hide these particular information on your template or whatever you have. Maybe let's say moving forward your component grows too complex and you have so many components within this page. You have 10 more lightning cards or whatever logic for whatever business requirements you may have, but you need to display that logically. Not everything needs to be displayed all the time. You need that to be displayed logically. So for that, we are going to wrap this up in a if true template. So whenever a variable is defined as true, this will be displayed. Whenever that variable is defined as false, this will be hidden. So to do that, I'm writing template if true, and I will have a variable here. Let's say show my card, right? Let's say show my card, and I need to close this or wrap this whole lightning card inside this template. So outside the outer template, you cannot even touch it, because this is what tells it that this is a LWC component. So the outer template is is going to remain untouched. But later on, coming to the second line, I can have this particular structure template if true, and I say show my card. And this is just a variable which I am going to define in my JavaScript. This is not something that Salesforce provides you. So now inside this JavaScript, I will say show my card is equals to false. Let's say the initial value is false. Now I need a way to toggle this particular variable to turn it into true. So let's say I give a button here. So like in HTML, you say button tag, and LWC to use Salesforce framework, we say lightning button, right? I say label and I say show or hide. And on click of this button, I actually want to change the value of this variable. So that on click of this button, I'm going to invoke a JavaScript method which will say handle click, right? I close this. And mind you, I'm having this lightning button outside the template so that at least it is visible. If I add this button, lightning button inside the F2 template, it is not going to be visible, right? Now I go here and I say handle click. This was my method which I mentioned here, that whenever you are clicking this button, this particular this particular method should be called handle click. So this is my method, and I say whenever this is called, I want to turn this particular variable to. You have to use this keyword to reference any variable that you have declared in the JavaScript. All right. Now I say this. So what will happen is initially your show my card will be false. So initially this will be false and nothing will be displayed, but you will be seeing this button. But when you click on this button, it will actually when you click on this button, it will actually invoke this method which will turn this variable to true. And once this is set to true, this will be visible because this will be true. And that actually tells us how JavaScript is binded to the HTML. So my variable show my card is tightly coupled or binded with my HTML so that whenever a value change happens at the JavaScript level, HTML automatically fetches that value change, right? I deploy this to my org again to see whatever I have done just now is working or not. I refresh it to fetch the latest changes. Think the button is not looking. Just I need to give a variant. Yep. So you see now I have this button here, show and hide. If I click on show and hide button, just a second, I have this handle back, typing error was actually I missed the letter L in on click button. I will refresh it again. So now if I click on this button, it actually showed me this component. But if I click on this button again, nothing will happen. This component will stay here because once that variable has been set to true, it is not being set to false again. And if this was true, it is showing it. I will refresh this page to show this to you again. Right now nothing is visible here because show my card component is false, right? Now when I click on handle click button, it is going to turn that variable into true, and once that is true, my lightning card will be displayed. So if I click on this button, that turns to true and this displays, right? But if I click on this button again, nothing happens. Why is nothing happening? Because this is clicking on this button is actually just setting this value to true. It is not reversing it, right? So it is always going to be true and it is going to show this. What if I want to change on every click of the button? If it is false, it should be true. If it is true, it should be false. I will do that by an if statement. If this dot show my card equals to false, I want to turn that value to true. Else, to turn that value to false. So what this will do is that whenever your show my card value is false, it will turn that to true. But whenever it is true, it will turn that to false. If I deploy this component again, this is kind of a toggle switch. So you are toggling what you want to display and what you want to hide. Let's say now if I click on show button, it is showing me the component. If I click on show button again, it is hiding the component because this time the value was true and it was being set to false according to our JavaScript. Show, hide, right? This is how conditional rendering works in LWC. I will also take this moment to talk in brief about how you can use loops or iterations in the LWC components. Let's say you have an array of contacts. Let's say I have an array of contacts, and each contact, let's say for each contact, I have an ID. I say one. I have the name of the contact. Let's say Amy Johnson. And let's say the title, who this person is. Let's say this person is VP of engineering, right? And let's say I have three more contacts in the similar manner. Just make sure that you have proper indentation whenever you are typing your code so that whenever it grows, it doesn't become a headache later on. Whenever you want to identify some sort of bugs, it should be easier, right? Right now, I have an array of contacts, but since this is an array, it will not be automatically exposed to the HTML component. It will not track the changes. For that, you need to import track from LWC, and you need to bind this as a track variable. This will actually tell your HTML that this is a array and you have to track the changes in this array, right? I have this contacts array with three contacts in it. Each contact has ID, name, and title. ID, name, and title, right? Oh, will not know, so I'll change it. Anthony Johnson, let's say this is Jacobs, and he is director. Let's say I have Kevin Peterson, and he is the chief financial officer. In real scenario, your contact would actually be fetched from the backend or whatever is stored in your records, right? It will not actually be this way, but for the understanding purpose, this is a great way to understand what your array can look like. All right. Now, let's say I remove this particular div component, I comment this out, and if my show my card is true, I want to actually iterate over this array of contacts and I want to show these contacts. So what I'm going to do right now is that I'm going to use another template for each, just like you would use in uh, any of the programming language, any for loop. This is just very similar. I'm saying that for of each item in this particular array, so I'm saying contacts, and for item, what is my item going to be called? I said call it contact. Inside this, I'm going to have some line items, and each line item is must have a key. So you would say you need tag.id as the key, and for that, what you want to display is you want to display contact with name, comma, display dot right. If you want this to be, I'm defining it to be a list item. You can have this as an undefined list item by using UL at top of it. Save this in my local IDE. I deploy this. This is deployed. I click on refresh. And now if I click on show, it shows me 3 contact records that were a part of this contacts array. Amy Johnson, Jacobs Williams, and Kevin Peterson, with their titles VP of Engineering, Director, and Chief Financial Officer. Let me reiterate what I just did. I iterated at the front end in my HTML file using the array that I had to iterate over it, and each particular context which was being iterated was being stored in this single variable for item contact. Now this contact, every time the loop is being iterated for each contacts, my variable contact first stores this, second time when the loop runs it stores this, third time when the loop runs it stores this, right? Now first time when it runs it has this particular value, so ID is going to be 1, name is going to be Amy Johnson, title is going to be VP of Engineering. This is what I did. I said list the items with this ID, because since this is inside a for loop, your list item needs a unique ID to be identified later on, right? So this is a list item. This is coming through a for loop. You are not writing li 3 times in your code to display your contacts, because at the runtime you may have thousands of records. So every time you cannot write 1,000 line items one by one. You need a for loop and you need the system to do the rest, right? That way you have contact.name, you have contact.title. So this contact has ID, has name, and has title, ID, name, and title, and it loops over 3 times or for whatever number of contacts are there in this array. And I am not using apostrophes, or I'm not using it like a string, because I'm binding it from the variable that I have. If I try to use it like a string with this double apostrophes, it won't work, because it is showing me some errors right here, right? Because this is a variable from the JavaScript, so I have to use it as a binding property, right? This way it is being binded. But this variable, this is not something that I have in my JavaScript. This is for reference in my HTML only, right? So this has a different syntax altogether, right? This is what is happening when I try to fetch this on my LWC component. So you have if true component as an overview. If this is true, then all of this will be displayed. You have a lightning button which says whenever you click the button, a handle click method should be called, and this method actually toggles your switch, your variable, show my card, and whenever it toggles, it displays or hides your contacts using a for each loop. So if I click on hide, it hides. If I click on show, it shows that again, this is not, these are not two buttons. This is just one button, which is toggling my switch, right? This is what we intended to cover in our demo today. Basic component, HTML template, LWC bundle, conditional rendering, and loops and iteration. So there can be some mock interview questions. For example, what are events in LWC? So there could be two types of events, right? There could be two ways events can be handled. For example, if you have a parent component and you have a child component, what would be a child component? Let's say this is my test component and I create my test component too. And inside this, inside this first component, I want to utilize my second component to show some sort of HTML, right? That is a standalone HTML script, which I want to utilize in my test component. So this is going to be the parent, and it is going to contain the child component. So let's say I want to pass on some values from this component to the child component. That is going to happen through events. Or if the child component wants to pass some value to the parent, that is going to be happening through the events, right? Can events communicate across DOM or when they are on different Lightning pages? What does that mean? For example, I have this component here, right? Let's say I have another page, contacts, which also have this, which has a second component, right? Now I want this component to communicate with the second component, which is on the contacts page. So is that a possibility? That cannot happen through the pre-built events that Salesforce LWC provides you out of the box, because those are supposed to communicate only when your component lies on the same Lightning page or under the same DOM, but it cannot communicate across the DOMs, right? For that, we have a workaround, but with events, you cannot do that. You can certainly do that with other ways, right? Now we have seen template if you want to have three and conditions, basically you can have if inside if, and that is how it will work, right? Same way as we saw the track decorator right now. What is a track decorator? It actually tells that your array should be exposed to the HTML component. Same way you can have another decorator, which is API. And this API decorator basically helps you in exposing your JavaScript methods or variables to other components, not to the same component, but to the other components. Let's say I want to pass this variable to another, let's say this is a child component, it wants to show this value to the parent component. The parent component must directly access this value or this method. Then this should be identified as a API method, or should be used with API decorator, as you call it in LWC terms. That is how this is going to be exposed to the other LWC components, right? Now, after studying this LWC course, you may be eligible to appear for Platform Developer 1 and JavaScript Developer 1 certifications.